Hello there, welcome back to another tutorial. A while ago I made a couple of videos about drawing hair, but I didn't go into much detail about the coloring or rendering stage because it's quite a wide subject. But as much as it's important to know the key points of hair structure to draw it well, understanding how to translate its 3D sense through the rendering process is also vital. Otherwise you just have a pretty line art with a colored mess. So today I'm going to show you how I approach shading the hair in my illustrations. Before we dive into coloring though, there are some important things you need to keep in mind. Like I said in previous videos, the head is like a sphere and the hair is placed onto it like a piece of clothing, at least the straight type. So to shade it correctly, you first need a good understanding of light theory and 3D sense. I'll probably need to make a separate video about that too, so I won't overwhelm you today. But as I'm sure you know, everything we see in life, we're able to see it and distinguish its shapes because light falls onto it and it creates a lighter spot and a darker one, right? In other words, we see things because there is light and there's the absence of light. Well, right now we don't need much more to start coloring hair because that's what you need to focus on, defining where you want the main light parts and the main shadow parts. For this, I always recommend looking at references and studying from them. Sometimes it will be really easy to pick the two apart, and other times it will be harder due to the color of the hair or the intensity of the light. But there's this trick you can use if you're struggling to figure this out. Using a drawing program like Clip Studio or Procreate, Photoshop, or literally any photo editing app you can find on your smartphone, you should be able to find some settings that allow you to change the contrast of your reference picture. On Clip Studio, for example, we could go to Edit, Tonal Correction, and then choose curves or levels or veneerization. Pretty much any of these filters will do the job. And what you want to do is somehow max out both the light and shadows to create a very exaggerated contrast. This will help you spot the difference between the two of them more easily. Okay, so I've decided I'm going to have my light source somewhere around here, like on this reference picture. And what I'm going to do now is split the light and shadows like we are seeing here. Remember, we are going for big shapes here, absolutely no detail yet. Pretty much everything in arts becomes a much easier task if you start drawing from the biggest shapes to the smallest shapes. Because in case you didn't know, our brains read from big to small. So if you mess up the big shape, you're gonna mess up the details too, probably. Now look at it from afar. Kind of like if you were browsing a gallery on Instagram, Pinterest, or whatever. If from far away it looks okay, as in it matches the idea you have for the picture, then we can move forward. If it doesn't, you can go back and plan the main light and shadows again. Alright, now let's go back to light theory for a little bit. Flat surfaces like the cube already have well-defined hard edges to separate all the different light and shadow values. But spheres don't. Instead, light and shadows transition in gradients along the curved surface. And these gradients have to bend according to the shape of the sphere. They're not a straight line. So that's the next thing we need to keep in mind when coloring hair. If I want to represent the sphere of the head properly, I can't just make this a completely straight line here. I need to adjust it so that it bends like a circle or a ring. How much bending? That again depends a lot on the type of light you're trying to recreate and also your aesthetic. I can't give you a precise rule to follow in this case, so experiment until you find what works for you and for that specific piece, or like I said, use references. It's important to also notice that on the sphere, the edge of the shadow around here is usually somewhat blurry because it's not a flat surface like the cube. When translating this onto the hair, you have to keep in mind that yes, we have a sphere underneath, but hair is also made of very thin fibers. So personally, I wouldn't make this transition super blurry, because then it will seem like it's a different kind of material. There might be cases in which this smooth gradient could be the right choice, but I can think of any right now, so I'd recommend avoiding this effect for the most part. What I usually do next is think about the colors, and I'm going to beg you to please never use pure white for the lighter part, and never use pure black for the darkest part. And there's a reason for that. These two colors are opposites. One is a mix of all light colors and the other one is a mix of all pigment colors. If you don't know what that means, it's okay. We're not gonna use this information right now anyway. But pure white and pure black are also colors that are not that common in real life, despite what you might think. For example, on this piece, the person's wearing a black tank top, right? In theory, yeah, she is, but look which color comes out if I use the eyedropper. It's not pure black. Even on the shadows, some of them are not pure black either. They're just really dark shades of gray. So you have to be very careful using these two colors in your art. They shouldn't be part of your main shapes or main elements of the illustrations unless there's an actual reason for it. But even with that, you can have a lot of freedom when choosing the colors of your hair. For example, if you want to portray that the characters under the sun, you could give the colors a warmish hue. Are there neon lights around them? Go with purple or pink. Is it a creepy scene? Green and blues can help you represent that. Now this is where things get chaotic because literally every artist does this differently. We're getting to the rendering or detailing stage, whatever you want to call it. This is where we are going to add more volume to the hair by defining some of the shadows and lighter parts. I like adding halftones or midtones or whatever you call them on both the light and shadows at this stage. On the light parts, for example, we can add a soft gradient to make it transition smoothly towards the shadowed parts. Or if your lighter part is already pretty similar to the shadow, you can add more light on the other side, in case that's what you need to portray the ambience you have in mind. On shadows, I like playing around and adding either a slightly lighter color or a slightly darker one. Whatever I see fits the idea I have in mind. And for this, I think a soft brush or a blending brush like watercolors or my custom brush, the Tata brush, work very nicely. I'm just doing this to try to add some more color variety and make the drawing richer. Now once I have something I like, I just keep refining what I have, either by going back and forth between layers or painting on top of it if I'm too lazy. Some tips you can keep in mind during this stage are add darker and or sharper spots where two strands meet or cover each other, like on these little bumps on top of the head, or to add variety on some strands. Remember the first video where I told you about making the strands different in width and length? This is the same. Adding variety onto the coloring will make the hair feel more natural and dynamic other than painting it all the same way. You can also add a saturated or warmer color on the edge of the shadows. It's helpful to represent certain kinds of light sources or, just adding a fancy touch because it's art and we do what we want with it. For that same reason, you can also add highlights on shadows, especially with an anime style. Although my recommendation is to not make these highlights the same color as the one you have on the lighter part. In my opinion, it looks a little strange and it contradicts the information our brains gather from seeing this darker part. So I'd suggest giving this section of highlights a darker color. And you can even make the highlights fantasy colored. I like giving them a bit of variation, either by using analogous colors, which means colors that are near your main one, or opposite colors, or just colors that already appear on the character's design for the sake of keeping the picture within a consistent color palette. Talking about colors, it's become a very popular anime trend to add some crazy light and saturated color where the dark shadow should be. So feel free to try that too. This usually helps providing more depth between the different hair layers, but it can also be just your stylistic choice. By the way, I don't keep track of all the different shades I use when coloring hair. I know some artists like organizing the coloring process by choosing 3 or 4 or 5 different shades of their colors and sticking to them to build up the depth of the hair. But to me, this is counterproductive because my square brain gets too comfortable having these swatches on the side, and then it treats the painting process as if it were a precise math formula, which then makes the coloring look too fake somehow. Maybe that's just the perception I have of my own art, but I feel like the hair doesn't look natural enough if I follow that method. What I'm trying to say with this is that you don't have to have a definite palette with a specific amount of shades, okay? If it helps you, then great, keep doing it that way. But it's okay if you come up with a bunch of different shades just by blending colors randomly through the refining stage. I think if you don't restrict yourself to a combination of specific shades or hex codes, the hair will come out looking more naturally. If you want to add some texture to the hair, don't draw every single hair strand. Instead, use bristle or rake-like brushes on some spots to give the illusion that we can see some of the different fibers. Lastly, you can airbrush the bangs with the skin color to make them kinda see-through. The reason behind this practice is because the front bangs are usually less dense pieces of hair, and this helps creating the illusion that you can see the skin of the forehead underneath them. Alright, now allow me to get a little technical again for the final tip. Highlights and shadow shapes should go in sync, to put it somehow. They should help you portray the 3D shape of the head or the hairstyle. This will be a lot easier to explain with a visual example. If we use the sphere as a reference and put the light source on top of it, we'll see that the gradient splits into this kind of rings, you know? So on the hair, we'd place the shadows like this too, and the highlights would bend the same way. If you bend the shadows one way and the highlights the complete opposite way, you're making it a lot harder for the viewer to read the 3D shape of the hair. I know some artists paint their hair like this, but if you allow me to voice my opinion, it doesn't look good, in the sense that it messes up with the 3D sense of the head. I don't mind it at all when it's a more cartoony style. Even I do this with my glossy chibi style, because I keep its proportions and rendering a lot more unrealistic. But you know, for more realistic proportions or coloring, it's not a good stylistic choice in my opinion. But then again, you are free to do as you please. So if you like how this effect looks on your art, go ahead and do it. I won't chase you with a gun for it. And this would be it for today's lesson. The video ended up being longer than I intended, but it's so hard to explain you how to draw something and not get carried away by explaining another bunch of things that would be useful to know as well, but which aren't directly related to the subject. Anyway, I hope this tutorial was useful for you and that you learned a couple things at least. Feel free to download the base that I used for today's sample and do some coloring experiments with it. Now I gotta say goodbye. Keep on drawing and I'll see you in the next video. Take care!